Clara Wren stood on the frozen station platform with one carpet bag, a nurse's satchel, and a letter that called her punishment by the softer name of duty. Mercy Crossing stared as if shame had arrived on the train with her. Then a frostbitten cowboy collapsed from a freight wagon, clutching a cracked tin box he believed was worthless. Clara reached him first, though she had no home, no promised pay, and no reason to trust any man's gratitude. When his numb fingers opened around that box, a hidden fortune waited inside, along with a secret that could save them both or break them in public. Before the story begins, tell me where you are listening from tonight. Leave your country in the comments, and if you believe wounded hearts, quiet cowboys, and forgotten women can still find redemption, subscribe for the next Western romance. By the time Clara Wren stepped down from the eastbound train, the sky above Mercy Crossing had gone the color of old pewter. The wind pushed snow across the platform in thin white ropes. It bit at her cheeks and tugged at the black wool coat her aunt had called too fine for a woman in disgrace. Clara held her nurse satchel in one hand and her carpet bag in the other. The bag was not heavy. There had not been much she was allowed to take. A station boy with a red nose stared at her from beside the baggage cart. "You the punishment nurse?" he asked before he could think better of it. Clara looked at him quietly, his ears flushed. "That's what Mrs. Bell said. She said her nurse got sent from St. Anselm's because she crossed the matron." The train breathed steam behind Clara like an animal ready to leave her behind. She wanted to say she had not crossed the matron. She had crossed her own uncle, who wanted her married to a widower twice her age because the man owned 3 freight wagons and a brick house. She had crossed her aunt, who said gratitude was a woman's duty when she had been fed from another person's table. She had crossed the doctor who drank too much and blamed a death on Clara's hands because she would not lie for him. But Mercy Crossing did not know any of that. "I was sent to serve where a nurse is needed," Clara said. The boy looked toward Main Street. "There ain't nobody got much need here unless they can pay." The train whistle screamed. A porter tossed down the last crate, climbed aboard, and the wheels began to turn. Clara stood still while the cars dragged themselves away from the platform, taking with them the only road back to a life that no longer wanted her. Across the street, the general store windows glowed yellow. Several women stood near the stove inside, faces turned toward the glass. A man came out with a sack of flour over one shoulder and slowed when he saw Clara. His eyes traveled from her plain hat to her worn boots. "You Miss Wren?" he called. "Yes, I'm Abel Hart, station agent." Reverend's wife said, "Maybe you be boarding with the Larrabee family, but they sent word this morning their baby's cough passed and they don't need help." Clara felt the cold move deeper through her ribs. "I was told there would be a room arranged." Hart looked pained, but not enough to meet her eyes. "A room costs money. Letter said the hospital would pay the fare, not lodging. The church wrote to ask for a nurse." Church asked before folks learned the story. Clara's fingers tightened around the handle of her satchel. "What story?" He shuffled his boots. "That you were sent away after trouble. A patient died. There's talk you lost your place." The words landed softer than a slap, but deeper. Clara looked past him at the store windows, where the women pretended to straighten shelves and listen through the glass. "I did not lose my place because I harmed a patient," she said. Hart's face said truth was less useful than reputation. A laugh rose from inside the store. The door opened and a woman in a fur-trimmed bonnet stepped out. Beside her came a broad man with a curled mustache and a fine gray coat. "Well," the woman said, smiling without warmth, "Mercy Crossing grows grand. We now import scandal by rail." The man tipped his hat. "Silas Boone, Miss Wren. I own the store, the livery note, half the freight credit, and most accounts in this town worth keeping. My wife, Alma." Clara nodded once. Alma Boone looked at the nurse satchel. "You brought your tools. How practical. We do admire practical women here." quiet ones especially, Silas chuckled. There might be work. Miners cut themselves. Children catch fever. But you understand, folks will want to know whether your hands are steady. Clara had heard that tone before. It was the tone of people who offered bread with one hand and made you kneel for it. My hands are steady, she said. Almay's smile sharpened. Then perhaps they can scrub floors until someone trusts them with flesh. The store women laughed, not loudly. Laughter in a town like Mercy Crossing did not need volume. It only needed witnesses. Clara stood with snow gathering on the shoulders of her coat. She could feel hunger beginning under her breastbone. She had eaten the last biscuit from her pocket before dawn. Her aunt had sent no money, only the letter that described the posting as a chance for Clara to regain usefulness. From the west road came the clatter of wheels. Everyone turned. A freight wagon lurched toward the station through the snow. The team stumbling, harness bells dull with ice. The driver, a young man with panic in his face, shouted for help. I found him by the ravine. He's near froze. In the back of the wagon lay a man wrapped in a stiff buffalo coat. His hat was gone. His dark hair was crusted with ice, and frosts clung white to his lashes and beard. One hand was curled against his chest around a battered tin box no larger than a Bible. The wagon jerked to a stop. The man at the store porch stared. Someone said, "That's Eli Ransom." Another voice answered, "Thought he had sense enough not to ride the North Cut in weather like this." "Quiet," Eli Hart muttered. "Runs cattle out beyond Widow Creek, keeps to himself." Clara set down her carpet bag and climbed onto the wheel hub before anyone asked her to. The driver blinked at her. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Get him inside." Silas Boone stepped forward, frowning. "Now hold on. My store ain't a sick ward." Clara looked over her shoulder. "Then where is your doctor?" "Dr. Merrick is 3 towns over till Monday." "Then your store is the warmest room." The words surprised her. They surprised everyone else too. For one breath, the platform went silent except for wind. Then the man in the wagon gave a low sound, almost not human. His fingers twitched against the tin box. Clara touched his cheek. His skin was hard with cold. "He needs heat now," she said. "Not permission." The freight driver jumped down. Hart moved too. Between them, they lifted Eli Ransom from the wagon. Silas Boone looked ready to object again, but half the town had seen him hesitate while a man lay dying in the snow. So he opened the store door with a jerk. "By the stove," he snapped. "But if he dies on my floor, somebody pays for the boards." Clara did not answer. Inside, the store smelled of coffee, molasses, wool, kerosene, and human judgment. The women backed away as Eli was carried in. Clara knelt beside him and opened her satchel. His coat was frozen stiff. She cut the buttons loose, ignoring Alma Boone's gasp at the damage to good hide. She worked his boots off carefully, then his gloves. His fingers were pale and swollen. "Warm blankets," Clara said. Nobody moved. She looked up. "A man will lose his hands while you decide whether I deserve to be obeyed." The station boy ran first, then Hart pulled blankets from a shelf. The freight driver heated water. Clara set herself between death and the quiet cowboy's body, and for the first time since she had arrived, no one laughed. Eli's eyelids trembled. His cracked lips moved. Clara leaned close. "Do not try to talk, Box," he breathed. "It is here, not mine." His hand loosened. The tin box slipped against the floor with a dull clink. Clara caught it before it could slide under the stove. The lid had been dented, and the latch was frozen. Across the top, almost worn away, were initials scratched by a knife. CMW. Clara stared at those letters. Her mother's name had been Celia May Wren. Eli Ransom did not wake properly for 2 days. Clara slept in a chair beside the stove because no one in Mercy Crossing offered her a bed. When the store closed the first night, Silas Boone said she could not remain there after dark unless somebody respectable stayed with her. Mrs. Hart, the station agent's wife, came with her knitting and sat sour-faced near the pickle barrels until midnight, as if Clara herself might steal the frost from Eli's bones. By dawn, Clara's neck ached and her stomach cramped with hunger, but Eli's breathing had steadied. She had rubbed life back into his hands, inch by inch. She had fed him spoonfuls of broth Mrs. Hart brought grudgingly in a jar. She had listened when he muttered in fever about snow, a broken fence, a dead mule, and a stone chimney near Widow Creek. The tin box stayed under Clara's chair, wrapped in a towel. She did not open it. She told herself she had no right, yet the initials burned in her mind. C.M.W. Celia Mayron had died when Clara was 9. Fever had taken her in a rented room behind a laundry. Clara remembered her mother's hand, thin and hot, trying to tuck a strand of hair behind Clara's ear. "There is more to you than what they say," Celia had whispered. That was the last clear thing Clara remembered from her. On the second morning, Alma Boone arrived carrying a tray she did not intend Clara to eat from. "My husband says the cowboy's tab will be marked," Alma said. "Coal, blankets, floor space, broth, lamp oil, and loss of trade." Clara looked at the tray. "He nearly died. Nearly dying does not pay accounts." "No," Clara said. "But decency might." Alma's expression cooled. "You speak boldly for a woman with nowhere to sleep tonight." Clara lowered her eyes to Eli's bandaged hand. She would not give Alma the satisfaction of seeing the wound open. The store door banged. A little girl came in dragging a smaller boy by the sleeve. The girl could not have been more than 10. Her hair was braided poorly, with one ribbon missing. The boy's face was flushed and his breathing rough. "Ma said you're the nurse," the girl said. Ben won't stop coughing. Alma stepped between them. "Your mother has an account 3 months behind, Ruthie Bell. This is not charity day." The girl's chin trembled. "I brought eggs." She held up a basket with 4 brown eggs nestled in straw. "Dushmer." Alma laughed softly. "4 eggs do not buy a nurse." Clara rose. "They buy mine." Alma turned. "You are not employed here." "No," Clara said. "So, I set my own price." Ruthie stared as though she had never seen an adult choose her side. Clara knelt and touched Ben's forehead. Fever, not high enough for panic, but his chest rattled. "Where is your mother?" "She's sewing for Mrs. Boone." That silenced the room for a moment. Alma's mouth tightened. Clara gathered her satchel. "I'll come." "You will not leave Mr. Ransom," Alma said. Eli's voice, rough as gravel, came from the cot near the stove. "She will." Everyone turned. His eyes were open. They were gray, steady, and filled with pain he refused to show. Clara crossed to him. "You should not talk. Boy needs her more than I do. You need watching." "I've been watching myself 34 years. Hasn't killed me yet." "It nearly did." His mouth moved. It might have been the ghost of a smile. "Then now practice lying still." Silas Boone entered from the back room. "Good. You're awake. We need to discuss payment." Eli looked at him, then at Clara, then at the children by the door. "What do I owe?" Silas named a sum large enough to include every splinter in the floor. Clara said, "That is not honest." Silas looked delighted. "Miss Wren, in this town, accounts are kept by those with ledgers." Eli tried to push himself up, failed, and went pale. Clara put a hand on his shoulder. "No, not." He breathed through clenched teeth. "My horse," the freight driver, who had been warming himself by the flour sacks, took off his hat. "Gone." Eli found tracks near the wash. "Might be loose, might be dead." Eli shut his eyes. For a rancher who lived 7 miles out, a horse was not a luxury. It was legs, bread, business, survival. Clara saw him measure his losses in silence. Then Silas said, "There is one way to settle it neatly. Your north pasture note comes due in spring. Sign overgrazing rights now, and I'll clear this bill." Eli opened his eyes. The store went still. There it was, Clara thought. Not cruelty with a gun, not villainy with a black mask, just a man who waited until another man was weak enough to call theft a transaction. No, Eli said. Silas smiled. Think before pride empties your table. No, Clara looked down at the cowboy. His hand was shaking under the blanket, but his voice had not. She turned to Ruthie and Ben. Take me to your mother. Eli caught her sleeve with 2 fingers. Miss Wren. Yes? Take the box? Her heart struck once. Why? Found it near Widow Creek? Thought it belonged to old cabin trash? But you looked at it like it knew you. Clara felt every eye in the store turn toward her. Silas said, What box? Clara lifted her chin. A patient's property. Eli's gaze held hers. Keep it safe. For the first time since arriving in Mercy Crossing, someone had trusted Clara with something valuable. Not because she had papers, not because a church vouched for her, not because a family allowed her name, because he had watched her work. She tucked the tin box into her satchel and left with the Bell children. Outside, the cold slapped her breath away. Ruthie led her down a side road past the church, past 3 houses with smoke curling from chimneys, past a blacksmith shop where 2 men stopped hammering to stare. You really a bad nurse? Ruthie asked. Clara kept walking. No. Then why'd they send you here? Clara looked at the little girl's thin coat, the boy coughing into his sleeve, the gray town hunched against winter. Because they thought Mercy Crossing was the end of me, she said. Maybe it is not. The Bell cabin had 1 room, a leaking roof, and a stove that gave more smoke than heat. Mrs. Bell sat at a table, sewing a cuff by weak daylight. She looked frightened when Clara entered, then ashamed of being frightened. I can't pay proper, she said. You have already paid. Clara set the eggs on the table. She worked there for an hour. She mixed mustard and warm cloth for Ben's chest, showed Ruthie how to steam the room without soaking the bedding, and made Mrs. Bell promise to send for her if the fever climbed. When Clara rose to go, Mrs. Bell pressed 1 egg back into her hand. For you, she whispered. I heard you ain't eaten. Clara tried to refuse, but the woman closed her fingers around it. Outside, Clara stood beneath the low sky holding 1 egg like a treasure. She returned to the store near dusk. Eli was sitting upright, wrapped in blankets, face drawn but eyes awake. You look worse, Clara said. You look hungry. I am working. That was not an answer. She set her satchel down and warmed her hands near the stove. Eli nodded toward it. Box still there? Yes, sir. Open it. Clara glanced at the boons. Silas was behind the counter. Alma pretended to arrange buttons. Not here. Eli understood at once. Quiet men often did. Thin, help me stand, he said. You cannot ride. I can sit in a wagon. To where? My place. Clara stared at him. You have frostbite, no horse, and barely enough strength to insult your own judgment. My ranch has a roof. My babies. Definitely no boon listening through shell. Silas laughed. You plan to take this woman to your ranch alone. Eli turned his head slowly. You offering to nurse me instead. The station boy choked on a laugh. Alma stiffened. Silas' face darkened. Clara knew what people would say. A disgraced nurse riding out with a half-frozen bachelor. A woman with no family sheltering under a cowboy's roof. Her reputation, already ruined in their minds, would be buried by morning. Eli saw the understanding in her face. Ashira, I have a line shack, he said quietly. Separate from the house, stove works, door locks from inside. You can stay there and nurse for wages when I have them. You owe the store already. You owe you first. No pity, no soft lie, just the debt of honor. Clara looked at the windows where night pressed close, then at the boons, then at the child's egg still warm in her pocket from her palm. I will go, she said. Eli Ransom's ranch looked less like a dream of the West and more like a promise that had been kept through stubbornness alone. The house sat low against the land, built of squared logs and patched boards, with a stone chimney leaning slightly at the top. A barn stood beyond it, one door sagging on leather hinges. The corral fence had been mended so many times that no two rails seemed cut from the same tree. Snow lay in the yard with boot paths carved through it. There were no decorations, no curtains in the windows, no woman's touch except the clean order of a man who owned little and wasted nothing. The freight driver left them at the gate after helping Eli down from the wagon. Clara paid him with the egg from Mrs. Bell. He protested until she said, "Take it home to your supper before I change my mind." Eli watched the exchange but said nothing. Getting him inside took time. Twice he nearly fell. Twice Clara braced him with all her weight, and twice he apologized through clenched teeth, not because he leaned on her, but because he hated needing to. Inside the house, the cold had settled into every object. Clara lit the stove while Eli sat on a bench, white around the mouth. She found beans, flour, coffee, salt pork, and a jar of peaches put up from some better summer. She found no waste, no comfort, and no hidden plenty. "You live alone," she said. "Yes." "Any family?" "No." The answer closed a door. Clara did not push. She made him broth thin enough for his stomach and strong coffee for herself. When his hands began to ache with returning blood, she unwrapped them and checked the skin. 2 fingertips worried her. She did not say so yet. Eli studied her face. "Bah, not if you obey." "I dislike that word." "So do I," she said. "But I use it better than most." That earned the faintest curve at one corner of his mouth. He slept before dark. Clara carried her satchel to the line shack, which stood 30 paces from the house. It was small, plain, and cold enough inside to make her breath cloud. But the stove drew well, the roof held, and the door had a bolt. She set her carpet bag under the narrow cot and sat for a moment in the silence. No one was shouting. No one was telling her what she owed. No one was measuring the shame she brought to her room. She took the tin box from her satchel and placed it on her lap. The latch resisted. She warmed it between her hands, then worked the edge with a hairpin until the rust gave way. Inside lay oilcloth, folded tight. Clara unwrapped it carefully. There were banknotes, brittle but real, gold certificates, a deed written in a steady legal hand, a small packet of letters tied with blue thread, and at the bottom, wrapped in a baby ribbon yellowed by time, a plain gold wedding band. Clara could not breathe. The deed named 40 acres near Widow Creek and a small orchard plot outside Mercy Crossing. The owner was Celia May Ransom Wren. Ransom. Clara read the name again. Celia May Ransom Wren. Her mother had never spoken of being a ransom. Clara knew only that Celia had left somewhere west before marrying Clara's father, and that after both parents died, no one from that side had come. Her aunt said Celia's people were dirt poor and proud, which in her aunt's mouth meant unforgivable. The letters were addressed to Celia from a man named Thomas Ransom. The first began, "Daughter." Clara held the page until the words blurred. Her mother had family here, might be bland here, might be a past that had not rejected her at all. A knock struck the door. Clara quickly wrapped the papers. "Who is it?" "Eli." She opened the door to find him swaying in the snow with a quilt around his shoulders. "You should be in bed," she said. "I remember something. You nearly froze to death. Remember it tomorrow." He looked past her to the tin box. His face changed, not with greed but recognition. "You opened it." "Yes." "Good." Clara stepped back. "Come in before you collapse and make me drag you." He entered and lowered himself onto the chair. The small shack filled at once with his size and the winter smell of him. Clara set the oilcloth on the table between them. "The papers name my mother." Eli stared at her. "Celia May Wren." Clara said. But here it says ransom. He was silent for so long she heard the stove tick. My father had a sister, he said at last. Celia ran off before I was old enough to remember her. My grandfather never spoke her name without anger. Said she married wrong, east of here. Clara sat slowly on the cot. Then we are kin, might be by blood, not close enough to matter to a preacher. His ears reddened slightly when he realized how that sounded. I mean, I understand. He rubbed a hand over his face, then winced because his fingers hurt. The cabin where I found the box belonged to my grandfather. Roof caved last summer. I went after a stray cow. Storm caught me. Chimney stones had fallen. Box was behind one. Why bring it? Had your initial. They are my mother's. I did not know that then. No, but I saw the brewery. Clara looked at the banknotes. This is a fortune. For Mercy Crossing, yes. It belongs to your family. His eyes came up to hers. You are my family, it seems. The words were plain. They were not tender in the usual way, but something in Clara's chest, long held tight, loosened painfully. Eli, this could save your ranch. It has your mother's name on it. You found it. She hid it, or my grandfather hid it from her. Clara touched the wedding band. Why would he? Ransoms were good at pride, poor at mercy. The next day settled into a rhythm made of work. Clara changed Eli's dressings morning and evening. She cooked beans with salt pork, patched the torn lining of his coat, and cleaned the house because dust was no friend to healing. He complained only when she did too much. You hired me, she reminded him. I did not hire you to mend every sorrow this house ever had. That one was free. He watched her over his coffee, quiet as always. When the weather cleared, neighbors began to come. Not many, not at first. Mrs. Bell arrived with Ruthie and Ben in a wagon, driven by a cousin. She brought a loaf of bread and asked Clara to look at Ben's cough again. Then a miner came with a split palm. Then a woman named June Harris came with a burn hidden under her sleeve because her husband got angry near the stove. Clara treated them in Eli's kitchen. She charged what they could pay. 2 potatoes, a length of thread, a promise to send word if fever came to the south cabins. Eli sat near the window, useless by his own measure, and watched people remove their hats when Clara spoke. One evening, after the last patient left, Clara found a small pile on the table. 3 coins, a jar of honey, a child's carved horse, and a paper packet of tea. Your wages, Eli said. Our supper, Clara answered. You always turn payment into care. I know what empty tables sound like. He looked at the stove. So do I. The words were an opening, small but real. Clara waited. Me mother died when I was 12, he said. Father after. Grandfather took me in because cattle needed hands. He left me the land, debts, and his talent for silence. That explains the ranch, and the silence, and the Silas. Laugh softened. I talk when something is worth saying. Clara looked down before he could see how the sentence warmed her. By the second week, the town had 2 stories about them. In one, Clara Wren was a fallen nurse living under a bachelor's roof. In the other, she was the only person for 30 miles who would come through snow to tend a sick child. The second story traveled slower. Good truth often did. Silas Boone came on the 10th day with a ledger under his arm and a smile meant for business. He found Clara on the porch shaking out a blanket. Eli stood inside the doorway, coat around his shoulders, refusing to sit though he should have. Ransom, Silas said. I hear you are well enough to discuss accounts. I hear you are still counting blankets as if you spun the wool yourself. Silas ignored that. His eyes moved to Clara and Miss Wren, settling in. For now, dangerous phrase. For now, a woman without fixed standing can find herself moved along. Eli's jaw tightened. Clara answered first. I have work here. Work can dry up when people remember caution. Silas tapped his ledger. And wrenches can change hands when notes come due. Clara knew then that he had heard something. Not the truth, perhaps, but the scent of money. Men like Silas smelled advantage as wolves smelled blood. Eli said, "Leave." Silas smiled. "Weather has made you rude." "No, you have." When Boone left, Clara felt the day grow colder. "We must file the deed," she said. Eli looked at the road. "Filing means showing, not filing means losing." He turned. "You think I am afraid of Boone?" "No, I think you are afraid of what that box proves." His silence told her she had struck true. The hidden fortune did more than offer money. It tied Clara to Mercy Crossing. It showed that someone had buried a daughter's name in stone and let her vanish. It made Eli heir not just to land and debt, but to an old family cruelty. Clara folded the blanket. "My whole life, people have told me where I might stand. I want to know what my mother was denied." Eli nodded slowly. "Then we go to town tomorrow." The church bell was ringing when Clara and Eli reached Mercy Crossing. Sunday made the town look cleaner than it was. Snow covered the ruts. Women wore their best bonnets. Men scraped mud from their boots before stepping onto the church porch. Children fidgeted in stiff collars while mothers whispered warnings into their ears. Clara sat beside Eli in the wagon, the tin box under her feet. He had insisted on driving. She had insisted on bringing extra blankets in case stubbornness failed him. His hands were wrapped, his face pale under the brim of his hat, but his back was straight. As they rolled past the general store, Amma Boone stopped speaking to two women. The silence spread faster than any greeting could have. Clara heard her name without hearing the words. Eli stopped before the records office, which was closed for Sunday. "Tomorrow," he said. Clara looked at the church. "No, today." His eyes followed hers. "You sure?" "No, that is an honest answer." She stepped down before fear could change her mind. Inside the church, heat from the potbelly stove fought the cold with little success. The pews smelled of pine, damp wool, and old hymnals. Reverend Cole looked startled when Clara entered, then relieved, then worried. His wife gave Clara a small nod from the front pew. The Boones sat near the middle. Silas made room for Alma, not taking his eyes off Eli. Clara and Eli sat at the back. The service began. Prayers were spoken. Hymns were sung. Clara tried to listen, but every word seemed to pass through a wall of memory. Her aunt telling her, a woman without a husband must be useful or quiet. The matron saying, sign the statement and keep your place. Her uncle saying, Mr. Pritchard does not mind your history. After the final hymn, Reverend Cole lifted his hands. Before we part, are there knees among us? Silas Boone stood. Clara felt Eli shift beside her. Silas faced the congregation with solemn sadness. I dislike public unpleasantness, but for the good order of Mercy Crossing, certain matters must be addressed. We have among us a woman sent here under questionable circumstances, now residing beyond town with an unmarried man. My wife and I believe charity has limits where propriety is concerned. Murmurs rose. Clara's hands went cold. Silas continued. I also have reason to believe property has been concealed. Property belonging to the Ransom estate, perhaps wrongfully held by this same woman. Eli stood slowly. Every head turned. You finished? He asked. Silas smiled. I speak for concerned citizens. You speak for your ledger. A few men looked down. Silas' face reddened. Are you denying she has a box taken from ransom land? No. That single word moved through the church like a match flame. Eli stepped into the aisle. Seeing Jane gave to her. While fevered, Alma said. Eli looked at her. Madam, I knew greed before fever and after. Yours has the same face both times. A shock cough came from the front pew. Clara stood then. not because she felt brave, but because she could not let him spend his thin strength alone. The box bears my mother's initials, she said. The papers inside name her as Celia May Ransom Wren. I believe she was Eli Ransom's aunt. Reverend Cole frowned. Celia Ransom. An old woman near the stove made a soft sound. Everyone looked at her. Mrs. Ada Pike, who had lived in Mercy Crossing longer than the church bell, gripped the pew before her. I knew Celia. Clara's breath caught. Ada Pike's voice trembled, but hell, she was Thomas Ransom's daughter. Pretty girl, too soft for that house. Fell in love with a schoolman passing through. Thomas forbade it. Said if she married him, she'd get nothing. She left anyway. Silas said sharply, memory is not law. Ada turned on him. No, but sin is still sin, whether a paper clerk stamped it or not. The church went silent. Clara could barely speak. Did my grandfather send after her? Ada's eyes filled. Your mother wrote more than once. After her husband died, she asked to come home with her little girl. Thomas told folks no daughter of his would crawl back used and poor. Later, I heard he drank himself sick, regretting it. But pride kept him cruel till death. The words entered Clara slowly. Her mother had not been unwanted by the whole world. She had tried to come home. A door had been shut. Eli's face looked carved from grief. I did not know, he said quietly. Clara believed him. That mattered more than she expected. Silas recovered first. Touching story. Still, if funds are in that box, debts against the Ransom property must be considered. Mr. Ransom owes my store. His note on the north pasture. The box is not his, Clara said. Silas' eyes snapped to her. Convenient, she reached down and lifted the tin box for all to see. No, painful. Eli turned. Clara, she heard the warning. Not because he wanted the money hidden, but because he understood public wounds. She opened the box anyway. Gasps moved across the pews when the banknotes showed. Clara held up the deed. This name's my mother. Tomorrow I will take it to the records office. If there are legal questions, let them be legal. But I will not be called thief by a man hoping hunger makes people cheap. Ruthie Bell, sitting beside her mother, whispered loudly, she ain't a thief. A few people smiled despite themselves. Silas did not. You think money buys respect? Clara's voice steadied. No, Tot. But it might buy coal for children, medicine for fever, seed for spring, and freedom from men who confuse debt with ownership. For the first time since Clara had come to Mercy Crossing, no one laughed. After church, the town spilled into the yard, buzzing. Ada Pike came to Clara and took both her hands. You have Celia's eyes. Clara could not answer. She was afraid any word would become a sob. Eli stood near the wagon, waiting. When she came to him, he looked as though he had aged years inside an hour. My grandfather did that, he said. You did not. I carried his name. So did my mother. So do I, it seems. He looked at her carefully. Does that trouble you? That I might belong to the place that rejected her? Clara looked toward the road beyond town. Yes, but it also means the rejection was not the end of the story. The next day, they went to the records office. Silas Boone went too. He arrived with a lawyer from Deer Creek, a thin man with ink on his cuffs and indifference in his eyes. The clerk, Mr. Doss, examined the deed, the letters, the banknotes, and the wedding band, as though human sorrow were a math problem. By noon, the truth stood plain. The 40 acres and orchard plot had been deeded to Celia Ransom before she left, recorded but never claimed. The banknotes were all but valid if confirmed by the bank in Cheyenne. The gold certificates were enough to clear Ali's store debt 3 times over. The letters proved Thomas Ransom knew Celia had a child. Silas argued until the lawyer told him quietly to stop. Clara should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt hollow. That evening at the ranch, she found Eli in the barn, trying to mend harness with bandaged fingers. He was making a poor job of it. You should not be doing that, she said. He did not look up. I should have known. You were a child, old enough to hear things, old enough to ask. And if you had, would your grandfather have answered kindly? Eli pulled the leather strap too hard and winced. Clara crossed the barn and took it from him. Let me. He released it. They stood close in the lantern light. The horses shifted in their stalls. Snow tapped softly against the barn roof. I have been angry at ghosts all day, Clara said. My grandfather, my aunt, the doctor, everyone who decided silence was easier than truth. But when I look at you, I do not feel that anger. Eli's voice dropped. What do you feel? The question was too plain to hide from. Clara kept her eyes on the harness. Safe, and that frightens me. He did not touch her. He did not step closer. He only stood there, letting the confession exist without grabbing at it. At first, he said, I thought finding that box might save the ranch. Now I think it found you. She looked up. His face was tired, scarred by cold and old loneliness. But his eyes were steady. Outside, a rider came hard into the yard. The moment broke. A man shouted from the dark. Ransom, Miss Wren. Bellboy's fever turned. Clara grabbed her satchel. Eli reached for his coat. She said, You are not strong enough? He took the coat anyway. Then, I will be weak beside you. Ben Bell's fever burned through the night. The Bell cabin was crowded with fear. Mrs. Bell knelt by the bed, whispering prayers into her apron. Ruthie stood stiff in the corner, trying not to cry because children in poor houses often learned early that tears used breath needed for work. The stove smoked. The roof leaked melt water into a pot. Every cough from the boy sounded too deep for his small chest. Clara worked until her back ached and her eyes blurred. She cooled him, steamed him, coaxed water between his lips, sent Eli to fetch clean snow, then more wood, then Mrs. Cole from the church, because Mrs. Bell was near breaking. Eli obeyed without pride. By dawn, Ben's fever had not risen further. By noon, it eased. Mrs. Bell took Clara's hands and kissed them. Clara almost pulled away. She was used to hands being blamed, not blessed. When she and Eli stepped outside, Mercy Crossing lay under a hard blue winter sky. Smoke lifted from chimneys. Somewhere a rooster made a confused claim about morning. Eli leaned against the wagon, pale with exhaustion. You should have stayed home, Clara said. You needed wood. I could have carried wood. I know. That answer settled warmly between them. Before they could climb into the wagon, Alma Boone came down the road with two women behind her. All three wore church faces, which Clara had learned meant judgment dressed as concern. Miss Wren, Alma called. A word. Clara closed her satchel. Ben is resting. Speak softly. Alma glanced at Eli. This concerns arrangements. Now that your circumstances are improved, certain improprieties can be corrected. Eli's expression hardened. Careful. Alma ignored him. Mr. Boone has generously discussed a solution. My cousin Everett Shaw is a widower with 2 children. He needs a practical wife. You need restored standing. A marriage would quiet talk. For a moment, Clara could only stare. There it was again. A woman as remedy. A woman as payment. A woman as broom to sweep scandal from other people's floors. No, she said. Alma's smile held. Think wisely. Money does not erase what people believe. Protection matters. Clara looked at the Bell cabin. Mrs. Bell watched from the doorway, fear and hope fighting in her face. If Clara refused, the Boones could punish those who depended on store credit. They could whisper until doors closed again. They could turn her work into scandal and her inheritance into greed. Eli stepped forward. She said no. Alma turned on him. And what do you offer her? A bachelor's ranch under debt, a name stained by the same family cruelty that drove her mother out? You think standing beside her in doorways makes you noble? Eli went still. Clara saw the words strike him because they carried enough truth to hurt. His ranch was fragile. His name did carry pain. His protection could become another cage if he let love decide for her. He looked at Clara then, and something in his face changed. He stepped back, not away from her, away from claiming her answer. Miss Wren speaks for herself, he said. The dignity of it nearly undid her. Clara faced Alma. I will not marry a stranger to make gossip comfortable. I will not trade my mother's land for a place at a table where I must be grateful for scraps. I will remain in Mercy Crossing if my work is needed. I will leave if I choose. But no man will take my life and call it rescue. Alma's face flushed dark. You will regret pride. Clara lifted her chin. I have regretted obedience more. The women behind Alma looked down. One of them, Mrs. Harris, the woman with the burned sleeve, whispered, Amen. Alma heard it. Her eyes flashed, but she turned and swept away. That should have been the end of it. It was not. By evening, Silas Boone refused credit to the Bells. Then to Mrs. Harris. Then to a miner whose wife, Clara, had cheated. He told them all the same thing. Until Miss Wren's legal affairs were settled and moral questions answered, he would not risk extending accounts to those involved in her circle. Mercy Crossing learned quickly how expensive gossip could become. At the ranch that night, Clara counted the banknotes on Eli's table. The hidden fortune looked large in one way and small in another. Enough to change her life, not enough to feed a whole town forever. Eli stood by the stove, watching the cost of compassion arrange itself in paper stacks. I can clear their accounts, Clara said. You can, but then Boone keeps the power. He gets paid and learns he can starve people until someone with a conscience empties her pocket. Eli nodded. That is his usual method. What breaks it? A second store, or freight brought in from Deer Creek, or people willing to go hungry longer than Boone can go unpaid. Clara looked at the deed. 40 acres, orchard, a little land that had waited years under snow and neglect. What if we start with supplies, she said. Flour, beans, coal oil, quinine, sell at cost until spring. Eli stared. That would make you enemies. I seem to have them already. It would spend your fortune. It was married because my grandfather thought a woman who chose love deserved nothing. I will not honor him by hoarding it. Eli came to the table. Clara, listen to me. You do not owe this town your inheritance. No, I owe my mother a different ending. His face softened in a way that made him look younger and more wounded at once. You are sure? No. He smiled faintly. Another honest answer. She touched one of the letters. I am afraid every day. I was afraid at the station. Afraid in the store. Afraid when I opened the box. Afraid when Alma spoke of marriage like a sentence already passed. Courage has not felt like fire to me, Eli. It feels like carrying water with shaking hands and not spilling all of it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I have 2 steers I can sell. No. Yes, you need them. I need to stand somewhere besides the shadow of my grandfather. Clara's throat tightened. You do not have to buy redemption. I am not buying it. I am choosing it. The next morning, Eli rode with a borrowed horse to Deer Creek, though Clara argued until he promised to take the freight driver with him. He carried a list written in her hand and money from the tin box in Chihuahua. He also carried his grandfather's old silver watch, the only thing of value he owned, free and clear. 3 days passed. In those days, Mercy Crossing tightened like a fist. Silas Boone told people Clara was trying to purchase virtue. Alma said Eli Ransom had been trapped by a clever woman with money. Everett Shaw, the proposed widower, came to Clara at the records office and said he did not mind a woman with a past if she learned humility after marriage. Clara told him a fever chart had more charm. The story spread by supper. On the fourth day, snow began again. Heavy, wind-driven, mean. By dusk, Eli had not returned. Clara stood on the porch of the line shack with her shawl clutched tight, staring toward the road. Every fear she had refused all week came back with teeth. Frostbite, ditches, a horse breaking a leg, men from Boone's Circle deciding the road was a good place to teach a lesson. At full dark, Ruthie Bell came running through the snow. "Miss Clara, wagons coming." Clara seized a lantern and ran. Two freight wagons emerged from the white dock like ships. Eli rode beside the first, hunched in the saddle, face gray with cold but alive. Behind him came sacks of flour, beans, coffee, salt, lamp oil, blankets, coal, medicine, and a small iron stove for the clinic Clara had only dared imagine. The town followed the wagons to the empty feed shed near the station, a building Eli had leased with his watch money before anyone could stop him. Silas Boone arrived as the first sacks were unloaded. "What is this?" he demanded. Clara stood in the lantern light, snow in her hair, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her wrists. "A supply room," she said. "Accounts kept fair, prices posted. No credit refused because a woman displeases you." Silas looked at the crowd. "You think this will last? Charity never does." Eli climbed down slowly from the saddle. He looked ready to fall, but his voice carried. "It is not charity. It is trade without a noose." A murmur moved through the townspeople. Silas pointed at him. "You will regret this when your note comes due." Eli reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "My note is paid." Silas froze. Eli handed the receipt to Mr. Dawes, the records clerk, who had come to watch from the edge of the crowd. Dawes adjusted his spectacles. "Paid in full," he said. Clara turned to Eli, stunned. "You paid the ranch note? Sold the steers? Sold the watch? Used less of your money than planned, Lee." He met her eyes. "I told you, I choose where I stand." The crowd heard it. Maybe not all the meaning, but enough. Silas Boone had built his power on hunger, debt, and shame. That night, in falling snow, people saw another way to stand. Spring did not come all at once to Mercy Crossing. It came first as dripping eaves, then mud, then the smell of thawed earth beneath the snow, then green shoots near fence posts and wagon wheels sinking deep enough to make men curse with renewed energy. Clara's supply room became a clinic because need has a way of naming a place. At first, people entered apologetically, as if accepting fair prices required confession. Mrs. Bell came for cough syrup and left 2 jars of pickled beets. Mrs. Harris came for salve and stayed to help wash bandages. Miners came for stitches. Children came because Clara kept peppermint in a blue jar and never asked whether their parents' accounts were respectable. Eli built shelves along the feed shed wall. Once his hands healed enough to hold a hammer, 2 fingertips remained stiff in the cold. Clara noticed. He pretended she did not. That became one of their gentler arguments. "You are hiding pain," she would say. "I am storing it quiet. That is not a medical practice. Is a cowboy one." She would take his hand anyway, rub warmth into the joints, and neither of them would speak for a while. The bank in Cheyenne confirmed the notes. The orchard plot was surveyed. The 40 acres near Widow Creek were put fully in Clara's name. On the day Mr. Dawes handed her the final papers, he cleared his throat and said, "Your mother should have had these long ago." Clara looked at the ink, the seal, the lawful recognition of a truth buried too long. "Yes," she said, "she should have." Silas Boone did not surrender gracefully. Men like him rarely did. He lowered prices until he lost money, then raised them when he thought people had no choice. He told suppliers Clara's clinic was unstable. He told the church that disorder came from women stepping outside proper places, but each effort revealed him more plainly. When his wife Alma fell ill in April, pride kept her home for 2 days. On the third, a Boone servant came to the clinic after dusk. "Mrs. Boone has fever," the girl whispered. "Mr. Boone says send medicine. He won't ask you to come." Clara put on her coat. Eli, who had been repairing a loose shutter, looked up. "Want me along?" Clara thought of every cruel smile Alma had given her, every measured insult, every public wound. Then she thought of fever, which did not care who had earned kindness. "Yes," she said, "but not to protect me. To carry the lamp at the Boone house." Silas opened the door with a face like iron. "I requested medicine," he said. "Fever requested a nurse," Clara answered. For a moment, he looked as if he might close the door. Then Alma coughed from the back room, a raw, frightening sound, and fear humbled him faster than virtue ever had. Clara worked through the night. Alma's fever was hard, but not beyond help. Clara changed linens, brewed willow bark, cooled her wrists, and made Silas boil water until his fine shirt stuck to his back. Near dawn, Alma opened her eyes and saw Clara beside her. "Why?" Alma whispered. Clara wrung out a cloth. "Because I know what it is to be left to the mercy of people who dislike you." Alma turned her face toward the wall. Tears slipped into her hair. Silas stood in the doorway, gray with exhaustion. "What do I owe?" Clara looked at him. "Pay Mrs. Bell for the sewing you underpriced. Restore credit to the Harris family. Forgive the miner's winter flower debt." His mouth tightened. "That is not a fee, no," Clara said. "It is treatment for something sicker than fever." Eli, standing behind her with the lamp, almost smiled. By Sunday, everyone knew Clara had saved Alma Boone. The next church gathering was crowded. Some came for worship, some came for spectacle, some came because public opinion was turning and they wanted to stand where the warmth had moved. After the hymn, Reverend Cole asked if there were needs among them. Silas Boone stood. The room tightened. Clara sat halfway back, Eli beside her, though not too close. They had been careful, not because they were ashamed, but because they both knew dignity grows best when not rushed before hungry eyes. Silas turned toward Clara. "I misjudged Miss Wren," he said. A murmur moved through the pews. His jaw worked as if each word had a hook in it. "I spoke where I should have been silent. I used debt too harshly. My wife is alive because Miss Wren came when called. The store will honor fair accounts. Past winter, penalties are withdrawn." It was not a full repentance. It was not poetry. But in a town built of ledgers and whispers, it was something. Mrs. Bell began to cry. Mrs. Harris took her hand. Then Ada Pike rose slowly with the help of her cane. "Aunt Celia," she called, "will someone speak her name right in this house at last?" The old woman's challenge hung in the air. Reverend Cole stepped down from the pulpit. He looked at Clara. "If you permit it." Clara nodded. He opened the church record book. Celia May Ransom Wren, daughter, wife, mother, once refused by this town, and now remembered in truth. The words moved through Clara like thaw water. For years, her mother had existed only in fragments. A fevered hand, a ribbon, a warning not to believe cruel tongues. Now her name stood in a church before witnesses. Eli's hand, resting on the pew between them, turned palm up. Clara looked at it. Then she placed her hand in his. No one laughed. After the service, people gathered outside, under a sky washed clean by spring wind. Ruthie Bell ran to Clara with a bunch of early wildflowers, mostly stems and hope. "For your clinic," Ruthie said. Clara bent and accepted them solemnly. "They're the finest medicine I have received." Ben, thinner but lively, showed Eli a carved horse he had made from scrap. Eli examined it as if judging bloodlines. "Strong legs," he said. "Good chest. This horse will do." Ben beamed. A wagon rattled past, and the town went on around them, not healed entirely, but changed. Change on the frontier was rarely a grand speech. It was a woman entering a store without lowering her eyes, a hungry child receiving flour without shame, a man paying a fair wage because the town now watched, a cowboy standing beside a nurse and letting her stand on her own feet. That afternoon, Clara rode with Eli to Widow Creek. The snow had melted from the old Ransom cabin, leaving behind broken logs, fallen chimney stones, and grass pushing up through last year's ruin. This was where Eli had found the tin box. This was where a hidden fortune had waited inside cold stone, while Celia's daughter crossed years of loneliness to reach it. Clara walked through the remains of the cabin. Eli stayed near the old chimney, hat in hand. "I thought we might rebuild here someday," he said. Clara turned. He looked at the creek rather than at her. "Not as a debt, not as shelter. You must accept. There is the orchard land and your clinic and whatever life you choose. But if that life ever has room for me, I would build slow, one wall at a time, with doors that open." Clara's heart hurt with the tenderness of it. "You are asking carefully," she said. "I am trying not to sound like every man who thought a woman's need was an invitation to own her." She crossed the grass to him. "When I first came here," she said, "I thought rescue meant someone opening a door before I froze outside it. Then I learned rescue can be quieter. Someone trusting my hands, someone stepping back so my no remains mine, someone selling what he values not to buy me, but to stand with what I am building." Eli swallowed. "Clara, I have room," she said. "Not because I am desperate, not because Mercy Crossing approves, not because my mother's land needs a man's name beside it." She took his scarred hand. "I have room because I choose you." For a moment he did not move. Then he bowed his head until his forehead rested against their joined hands. It was not the embrace of a conquering cowboy. It was the surrender of a lonely man who had finally been allowed to come home. They married in June beneath the half-grown shade of the orchard. Clara wore a simple blue dress Mrs. Bell and Mrs. Harris sewed together. Ada Pike pinned Celia's wedding band to a ribbon until the vows. Then Eli slipped it onto Clara's finger. With hands that trembled only a little, Ruthie scattered wildflowers. Ben carried the rings and nearly dropped them twice. Reverend Cole spoke plainly about love that did not erase sorrow, but gave it somewhere gentle to rest. Silas Boone attended from the back with Alma, both stiff, both quiet. When the supper tables were laid, Alma brought a jar of peaches and set it beside Clara without a word. Clara nodded. Some reconciliations began not with apology, but with food placed where hunger used to be. Eli danced only once, because he claimed cattlemen were not built for turning in circles. Clara told him he was built well enough. He smiled at that, and the whole orchard seemed to warm. By autumn, the new house at Widow Creek had a roof, a porch, and windows facing the morning. The clinic in town had a painted sign. Clara Wren Ransom, nurse, supplies, and care. Fair accounts, no shame at the door. On the first cold night of the year, Clara and Eli sat by their hearth while wind moved along the eaves. The old tin box rested on the mantel. It no longer held money. The fortune had become shelves, medicine, seed, paid notes, repaired roofs, and a town that had learned, however imperfectly, to measure worth differently. Inside the box now lay Celia's letters, the blue thread, and the receipt for Alias Ranch note paid in full. Clara leaned against Eli's shoulder. His hand covered hers, warm despite the scars winter had left. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "what would have happened if you had not found that box?" Eli looked into the fire. "I did find it," he said, "but you were the fortune." Outside, snow began again, soft against the dark windows. Not the killing snow that had brought him half dead to Mercy Crossing. Not the lonely snow that had met Clara at the station. This snow fell on a house with lamplight in the windows, bread on the table, medicine on the shelf, and two wounded hearts, no longer hidden from each other. And on the mantel, the cracked tin box caught the firelight like gold.